Okay, so welcome back to another video on the Insider, and today we are looking at coaching the drill stack. You may have seen from the other videos like how we're integrating the system across different models, how we're using drill stacking with speed, change of direction, and the complementary nature of it. And today I wanted to take you through some of the finer ways in which that you are able to coach and actively some of the things you need to be looking out for. Now, I'm not going to dive into specific stacks there for later videos, but what I am going to do is really dig deep, dig inside, and start to show you some of the areas and how you can perfect and master your coaching. So, one of the most powerful elements and powerful for a better term, um, well, what makes it so good? Sorry, what makes it so good is that how complementary in nature it is. So it feeds itself, and the reason why it is so good is it feeds itself based on some real empirical research, like some of our founding theories in movement and skill acquisition for coaching, and it comes back to a couple of things here, but one of them, and this is where we get segments from, is the notion of key movements. So, key movements, as coined by Yuri Verkhoshansky, were identified as the sort of, in the exploded view, the component parts of what makes um, any movement effective. So if we took that exploded view diagram and broke things down from acceleration, for example, then some of the key movements that we would initially see are going to be dynamic hip extension. And so within that key movement, what we're looking at is the lumbar pelvic position, uh, the thigh, okay, and how the thigh interacts with the lower, like the pelvis and the lower back. So that's one of the key movements that we can isolate and identify within our segment. And that's where I always suggest all my athletes start and all my coaches start. That's where I suggest you start, is identifying that initial key movement that is the closest thing to the center of mass. The reason why we want to focus on that first is most of the athletes that we're going to be working with are usually, this is the first time they've been exposed to a lot of this sort of stuff. So it's easier for us to really start to focus on the way that they move their hips, because if we can focus on that, then we can actually start moving the center of mass. I think in a coaching point of view, when we identify that an athlete, for example, is learning to sprint or low levels of training to sprint, they're still really unaware of the way that they're coordinating their body. So it's really important for you as a coach just to accommodate everything else for them. If we can get their hips moving, then we can speed the feet up. But if it's hard if our hips don't move and we move with fast feet. So that's the first part we focus on. So we're going to take that hip extension and we're going to isolate that. Then, as we are coaching through the process of movement pattern and skill, our job is to directly see how that segment is interacting and surviving the new layer of complexity laced on it. So, from our segment, we're just looking at some hip extension. An easy neuromuscular activity that you can do with an athlete is just get them kneeling down and sit on their heels and then extend their hips. And try and get them to do it multiple times and trying to improve their speed of execution on that. And then you can get them from kneeling, so with 2 feet on the ground, kneel up to try and make enough space to put their foot on the ground. And there's a medicine ball series of that inside the progressions manual that you would have had access to. So that's a really targeted way of doing it. And then to see how it survives, we want to see if they can do it in our low level base motor control work, so such as our bilateral wall squat, our single leg wall squat, our overcoming, our ISO, our yielding variations, our full range, our overspeed, as you know that system stuff already. We want to see how it can be survived within that. And depending on the specific phase, so like an off-season phase, we can have more time deliberately targeting this. If it's in season, then we want to push it and understand that fractional utilization that we have of our skill transfer that we're going to get. And I think that's a huge part, is making peace with knowing, well, I'm getting X amount of transfer with X amount of time, and that's good enough. We need to understand what we're chasing here. So when we're coaching, again, coming back to coaching the drill stack, this is where we would use the learn, load, execute model. So the learn is going to be the segment, and then we're going to load in different variations. So we can actually load through the segment as well. So if you're off season, you would be, if we really needed to focus on hip extension, or if we were rehabbing and really needed to focus on hip extension from like a proximal hamstring issue, or, you know, you name it, heaven forbid you tear a glute, that's sore. But we could load through the hip extension by adding bands, medicine balls, creating more ballistic, but reduce the locomotive task. So everything from kneeling is all hip extension focused. So when we get to the movement, so my first eye, what I'm looking for, if I'm focusing on hip extension, I'm going to put them into a standing 2-point crouched start to begin with. So give them stuff to load with, and then I'll just ask them to do a 1-step push out, and that's loading, because we're adding ground reaction force, complexity, increasing rate of force development, many things that we are doing in this stuff, still in a general speed sense. And I'm going to focus on initially, how fast is that hip extension being created? And don't make the mistake that you should just add a band on someone to load that hip extension, because sometimes an athlete who's really, really strong will only be able to hip extend well when they're placed under force, because they can't do it fast enough. So your strategy, you should see, and this happens quite a lot typically, if your athlete is just extending and it looks really slow, don't add a band. You have to create more speed of movement with it. So that's where you can throw med balls, and a med ball acceleration, needing 2-point, a 2-point explosive throw into acceleration is going to increase the rate of force development, because it's going to positively accelerate the athlete because we're throwing that ball. So another consideration when we're coaching. And then as we get to that pattern, we're trying to then assess how much hip extension can we get to optimally put the foot, exchange our limbs and create a good contact. Now, that's going to be depending on to a few things. You could get really good extension out of that athlete, but then their foot contact is late or it's early. Typically, it's going to be early, because their leg is going to still move at the frequency that they can normally do it. But now that we've added more hip extension, the foot's going to come down, and it's going to come down early. All right. So because it's going to move slower than the hip is moving faster, if that makes sense. Hopefully it should. So as the hip is traveling too fast, increased speed going forward, the leg speed needs to increase in order to get it down quicker to counteract the newly realized speed of hip extension. So and then understanding, well, if we can do that once, can we do it twice? Can we do it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times? Can we whack it all the way up to 10 steps? Because that's how we'll build some real positive acceleration. But focusing here through the skill, steps 1 to 3, 4 to 7, etc., etc., and that's how we start to build it. So for today, this is really a bit more of a start to deep dive into the complexities of coaching the drill stack, and first and foremost following the thread of your segment, your key movement into body links, which your segment is your key movement. Your movement is what is known traditionally as a body link, and your pattern is where we start to create the skills and the movement skills associated with those two determinants, which are sort of directly driven off of special strength and specific strength qualities. So that's how we start to understand the development of skill and how it is fed with strength and the way that we can do that. So make sure you stay tuned for the next video, where I'm actually going to give you a big overview of what's known as the magnitude of effect and how the Sport Speed system allows that to happen, which is going to give you more time and understanding of how you can focus on your programming and switch your phases when you need to.